Good. This week's Torah portion is Ge'et Hanan, and we'll start this speech of the Rebbe now, and we'll finish it, God willing, on Friday. Tomorrow is Tisha B'Av, so listen, Moshiach should come, build the Holy Temple, which, if he does, there probably won't be a class tomorrow because everybody will be pretty busy, but who knows? But if, God forbid, Moshiach does not come and build the Holy Temple, and it could be just, the Rebbe brings it down, that the Moshiach can come and build the temple, and the whole thing will be ready to go in like 24 minutes. Huh? Now, no temple, exile in 24 minutes. Temple, no more exile, redemption, everyone's here. The Rebbe brings that as a, how does he bring it as a proof? It says that Kohanim are not allowed to drink wine. There's one opinion, that a Kohanim priests are not allowed to drink wine because they have to serve in the Holy Temple, and it takes 20 minutes, 24 minutes, whatever, for the effect of wine to go away, the bare minimum. So if they drink wine, it could be that in the temple will come and they won't be ready, 24 minutes. Okay. So the temple could come anytime. Nevertheless, tomorrow there probably will not be a class. On Friday, there almost certainly will be a class. So let's start. This is a speech given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1962, if I'm not mistaken, 1962. And it's talking about, in this week's Torah portion, one of the big features, we just finished saying that it was, 1952, I'm sorry. 1952. Is that right? No, I'm sorry, 1962. It's a different looking. Okay, so this week's Torah portion also features the repetition of the Ten Commandments. And over there it says like this. It says that God spoke to the Jews face to face. And it says, remember, there was a kol gadol, the Jewish people, you heard a big voice, velo yasaf, and it did not stop. As they're called from the service at the verse, that this voice, the sound of the Ten Commandments, the Jewish people were all there, right? Is nit mapsikav, and it didn't stop. Now, just again to remind everybody, this is a bizarre thing that's not found in any of the religion, or I think in even any science fiction book or whatever you want to call it. According to Judaism, and Jews have been believing this for the last 3,300 years, that God, all the Jews were slaves in Egypt, all of them. All of the Jews were slaves in Egypt. And God took them all out one day. And 50 days later, they were standing at Mount Sinai. All the Jews, there were, it says, 600,000 just men above the age of 20. So let's say there were 2-3 million people, and they were all standing at Mount Sinai. And God spoke, God personally, face to face, spoke to all the Jewish people. Spoke to them all. And he gave them the 10 Commandments. That's the 10 Commandments that we have today. Same exact 10 Commandments. Okay. That's the basis of Judaism. Says the Rebbe, it's a little bit deeper than that. It's not just that, God is like this big, super, ultra angel or spiritual power or force or something. And he spoke to the Jews. No, it's not that. It's infinitely more. God creates the world. He's creating us all the time. But nevertheless, he spoke like a person. Who knows what that means? Okay, here we go. So it says that everybody heard this big voice, and the voice never stopped. It says, call Gadol, a big voice, and it never stopped. Now, we know that the voice, of course, did stop. Even more, the Jewish people prayed to Moses, please stop it. We can't take it anymore. And this voice that they heard, they only heard the first 2 commandments. So, it had to be cut up. The letters were cut up a little bit, right? It says, I am God that took you out of Egypt. So what does it mean it didn't stop? So the rabbis say there's 3 explanations. It says in the Torah that it didn't stop. So what did it mean? Number 1 says, Kol echad nechalek lezayin kolot, that there was one voice of God. God spoke, but that was divided into 7 voices. And each one of them was divided into 70. the 10. In other words, each one was divided into 10. So there were finally 70 languages. Their call is nit verblieben by Lashon HaKodesh. In other words, the language of the Ayin Lashon to the 70 languages. This voice that God spoke, he spoke in Hebrew. That's what it says in the Ten Commandments. But it says that this voice that God spoke, it didn't remain just in Hebrew, nor is Arabke Kuman. It came down into the 7 voices, and they divided into 70 different languages so that the Torah would be accessible to all mankind. We're talking about the written Torah. Number 1. Number 2, Shemimenu nitnabe kol anavim. What does it mean the voice never stopped? That from this voice of God in Mount Sinai, all of the prophets in the coming generations prophesied. Their call had sich nit oisgelost by Eis Maisa. This voice did not stop at that time, nor erzitzich. It continues outständig constantly. Das heißt, this means, as from their call, from this voice of the giving of the Torah, nehmen sich alle inyanim was seinen dernach nisgala geworden durch the Neviim. It was taken all the things which were revealed by the prophets, and the Chachamim, and afterwards the wise men in the time of the Talmud, and etc. Were called door by door of every single generation. So anytime a Jew says words to strengthen the Torah and to interpret the Torah properly, it comes from the same voice that God spoke at Mount Sinai. So in other words, don't say the words of Isaiah or the words of Ezekiel or the words of the Mishnah or the words of the Talmud. Those are made up by people. It's not so. It came through people, but this is the same voice that the Jews heard on Mount Sinai. This is God speaking through these people. So the first explanation is, what does it mean as a big voice that never stopped? That the voice divided into 70 languages that are still being spoken today to understand the Torah. Second is that this voice was divided into ideas, inspiration, and all the generations and to the prophets and etc. So these also come from God. Number 3, Shelo hayalo bat kol, that there was no echo. Had nit gehad kein wieder kol. What's this? Echa. That's a Yiddish word. Anyway, it means echo. That's an English word. Echo. There was no echo. The VS is by all the colors, like it is by every other human voice, that if you yell at something, there's some sort of an echo, some sort of a reverberation. You know, like when you record music in a recording studio, you record a voice, almost always they put some sort of reverb or echo or something on the voice. Always. You'll almost never hear, I don't know if there is such a thing. Every time you hear a recorded voice, there's either an echo in the room or there's a very slight, very, very slight echo in the room, or they apply some sort of an effect on the voice, because a voice naturally has some sort of an echo to it. Some sort of echo. But the voice at Mount Sinai did not have an echo. No echo. Okay, the Rebbe is going to say, good, okay, we can sort of understand the first 2 miracles, and he'll explain what they are. That it divided into 70 languages. That refers to the 7 Noahide commandments, which will come directly from God, right? All to the nations as well. And the fact that all the prophets, so that we don't deny the validity of the prophets. What's this thing about there was no echo? What type of a miracle is that? We'll see. We have to understand, mitvos dricht sich ois, the dritter pirush. How does this third explanation express itself? That there was no echo. The Groiskeit and Beligavul, the greatness of God, from the call, from the voice. How does this express the greatness of God in the 10 Commandments? The 10 Commandments that, how powerful the voice was of God. There was no echo. What does that show? According to the first 2 explanations, we can understand. The voice of God, it says, according to the first explanation, it was divided into 70 languages. It wasn't limited just to Hebrew. Other tzum zman, or it also wasn't limited to the time of the giving of the Torah alone. nor is a rup getragen, but it was brought down und sich zu sprechen, it was spread out to all of the languages and all of the generations. Right? Every non-Jew in every generation has the ability to understand that God has a will and that God spoke. And if you look into it, they'll see what is God's will and what is this talking for the non-Jews, for the Gentiles, what's called 7 Noahide commandments. 7 Noahide commandments are basically no idolatry. You're not allowed to say anything against God, blaspheme, say anything against God. You're not allowed to steal. You're not allowed to kill. You're not allowed to have forbidden sexual relationships. Explains what they are. Taking somebody else's wife, bestiality, homosexuality is forbidden by God. You're not allowed to eat a limb from a living animal that was taken from an animal while it was still alive. Can't eat a limb. It's called Aver Minachai. And you have to make courts to how do you say, to apply, to enforce the previous 6. Those are only the negative ones, but there's positive ones also. They say prayer and charity, but okay, nevertheless, there are commandments given by God to all nations, to all time. That's pretty impressive. That was given in Mount Sinai. Oh, but that's what said. But the third interpretation, what it says, that the voice never stopped, that there was no echo. This does not indicate at all the power of God's voice in Mount Sinai. Exactly the opposite. Was there called starker? The more power that there is to a voice, as starker the upline, the echo is stronger. Vibald is their call because this is the voice of God. Hat nit gehat kein up klang. It didn't have any echo. This seems to indicate that it was a very weak voice, huh? You stand up in the Alps or whatever it is, and you go and all of a sudden you hear But if you stand up in the Alps and you go nothing, there's no echo. The stronger you yell out, the stronger is the echo. So here we're saying that the voice of God at Mount Sinai was so strong, there was no echo. What does it mean? That's exactly the opposite of nature. What's going on? What does it mean? We also have to understand that Eibishter macht doch nit keine Nes umsitzt. God does not make a miracle for nothing. Without any sort of novelty to it. Because that Yeder call, every voice, every sound, Hot Bateva had naturally a echo, una call gadol, and a bigger voice has a strong echo. Is to leave us. Why did God have make a strange, seemingly meaningless miracle? To leave us as Gedar Zion, Shina Etav. Why did God change nature? That the powerful voice at Mount Sinai, and everybody agrees that it was powerful. It says the Jewish people, their souls jumped out of their bodies. Why is it no? God made a big miracle that this powerful voice of Mount Sinai, it did not have an echo. What type of a miracle is that? And why did God make it? Why? What's the purpose? The Meforshim, the explanation, the explainers of the Torah, the commentators of the Torah, they explain as the noitikite from their nes, that the necessity of this, the importance of this miracle was bichdei, in order nitzu given kind, or not to give a place to have an atos that maybe the Jewish people could think on meaning that the upleg, that this echo is maybe somebody else speaking. The Perush is, that's what some of the commentaries say. That's why there was no echo, so that the Jewish people wouldn't hear. God would say, I am God that took you out of Egypt. And then they would hear an echo saying, I am God that took you out of Egypt. And then they would hear another voice saying, I am God that took you out of Egypt. So, oh, there's 3 gods. It says, therefore, there was no echo. Says the Rebbe, that doesn't make sense to me. Their Perush upper is not moving. That's not understood. Because an echo is, you can see that it is, as air is, that an echo, you can see clearly that it is a uplet. You can see that it's an echo. Huh? You can see that it's just a copy of the original voice. In im hert men doch dieselbe stem, because you can hear the same sound und dieselbe Wert and the same words. It's just much weaker. So no one would make a stupid mistake of thinking that there's two gods. One God spoke over here, and there's another God that speaks a little bit quieter, and therefore you had to have no echo. Madach, as he is nit gewen, kein ta'ut. There couldn't be any mistake. Then their call from Matan Torah, when the voice of the Torah, when the sound of Matan Torah is gekommen from Daled Ruchos. It says when God spoke, the voice that they did hear in Mount Sinai, it came from all the four directions of the world, and from the heavens and from the earth. It was all the whole being, every molecule and every atom screamed out that they're being created by the Creator, that there's one God and He's creating everything. So no one made a mistake over there. From all the Zayden, from all the sides, it was this, and from the same side, at one time. I'm sorry. Is doch gewes nid shaykh zu chushes. So therefore, there's no worry that maybe you can make a mistake and think that the echo is a voice on its own. Is kentech? It's recognizable. You can see it immediately. Durch dem was is hert sich derselbe Stein, because you hear the same word and the same letters. So therefore, no one could possibly make such a ridiculous mistake as thinking, "Hey, did you hear that other God speaking?" Everybody would say, "No, that's just an echo." Everyone would know it. As Eris blows it up, like everybody knows that it's just an echo from the first one, and it's not another God. Okay, if so, that answer goes out, that the reason there was no echo was to avoid the mistake. The Jewish people wouldn't make a mistake, because they wouldn't make them. If there was an echo, they wouldn't make a mistake. That's ridiculous. If so, why was it? Why did God make the miracle that there was no echo? We also understand Torah the Torah tells us the Torah is not just telling us stories, nor to uplearn. The Torah tells us only to learn something from this in our service of God. Was for a whole, what type of a teaching is there from the fact that in Mount Sinai that there was no echo? What is it teaching us? Even if you want to say, okay, there was no echo, it's just telling a story. But the Torah comes to teach us something. Every word of the Torah it's a workbook. So what does it come to tell? And it is coming to tell us something very important. We'll see. The Atchala was hat in sich kalal gewen alesers devoros. The beginning of all of the 10 commandments is the word Anochi, I. Zocht the Gemara, it's in Shabbos. The Gemara says there's a whole section over that talks about giving of the Torah. God, the Jews heard God say Anochi, I. This word Anochi is the letters Ana, I, Nafshi, my soul, Katavit Yahavit. When God said, I am God that took you out of Egypt, I, of the initials, I am writing and giving you my soul. Ana, I, Nafshi, my soul, Katavit Yahavit. I'm not just giving you a book, I'm giving you my soul. This means, as by Matan Torah, by the giving of the Torah, Hatzich Atzmas Alain, the essence of God, he wrote it when eingegeben and gave it over in the 10 Commandments. That he said. Und gesagt hat ze zu jeden, and God spoke these words, the 10 Commandments. He didn't say it to all the Jewish people. He said to every Jew individually, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am God, your God, singular, not Elokechem. Lashon Yachid. Unit blois, and not just that not only to those Jews from in that generation, right? God gave it to every Jew. So not just those Jews in that generation, God gave it to each and every one of them, nor the results of, like the rabbis say, all neshamas, to all the souls. Side of Velcher, even those which were given Pharma and Torah, all those which were before the giving of the Torah, died in the in the three, what is it, the 4/5 of the Jews that died in Egypt and the Jews that died in the desert. All those souls were there at Mount Sinai. Inside the Allah, and also the later generations, like us, me and you, were with 3,300 years after the giving of the Torah. We were there, our souls were there. They were by Mount Sinai. And so jeder from Zay, and to each one of them, God said, I am God, your God, individual. Every Jew is unique. And the Jews are here to teach the world that every human being is unique. But we have to, why are we unique? Because God made each one of us unique. If there's no God, then it's like, snowflakes. What do we care if one snowflake is different from another snowflake? What importance is it? That every fingerprint is different from what do we care? But if we say that God is creating everybody, so everybody is really important and everyone is different. When God gave the Torah, he showed what that importance is. Ana nafshi, my soul, I wrote down and I gave. So jeder Yidden, to every single Jew separately, had sich kiviachal abgegeben, God gave with his whole essence. Ken a person might think that ana nafshi katavit yadi, that I gave my soul, this is only by the 10 Commandments. But the rest of the Torah, which is revealed afterwards in the course of the time when they were in the desert, through the Nevi'im, and also what was revealed by the prophets, and also what was revealed to the wise men and the generations, the wise men of the Talmud, etc. Is Chach Oich the Zehaben, they also were the the prophets and the wise men. They did not have the same. These wise men and the prophets, they weren't speaking from themselves alone. It wasn't just coming; they were inspired people. But this was the Spirit of God which is speaking through them, and God's words were on their tongue. The Eberster's great Geist, God's Spirit, had Geredet, was speaking through them. That's the Talmud. And it was on their tongue. They didn't have the power. You might think that they're speaking, but it's not the power of the giving of the Torah. In Zay state nit der Anochi. Good, they're speaking, they were inspired men, they were holy men, God was speaking to them, but not the same power as the 10 Commandments, the essence of God. Nor is it Zainen Budugma, it's something like Tzivuyim, they were like commandments which the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob gave before the giving of the Torah. Un azay, you might think this. Un azay, and that they stop over there. Seinen zum ganzen Klal und nicht kein Horos from jeder Besunder. You might think that the 10 Commandments, that was for all the Jews that were there, and the later generations, they just sort of, carried on the, how do you say, the heritage. Jeder Yid is bataka bechuyev zutan, aber nor weil is a chelik from their klal. You might think that every Jew has to do the commandments because we are somehow or other related to that thousands, millions of Jews that were buying Mount Sinai. Und nit as is tzivoy, it is not a special commandment to every single Jew. Me and you now. It was a general thing for those Jews that were there. That's what you might think. Therefore, it says, Kol Gadol V'lo Yosef. That's why it says it was a big voice and it never stopped. All in Yanim from Torah, everything in the Torah was very in this Gala, which were revealed in every generation, is als der Zelber Kol. It's the same exact voice that was heard on Mount Sinai from Matan Torah. Their call from Anochi, the sound of God speaking, I am God, your God, is through all the generations, nothing stopped it. Time also did not stop it. And it wasn't just spoken to the general Klal Yisrael. It was spoken to every single Jew individually, and every single individual Jew right now also, me and you. Was Atzmos read that the essence of God is speaking to every single how do you say, individual Jew separately. Und das was is nit niskala, that which was not revealed until this prophet came along, or until this wise man came along. And this is because Ado Tosha, to that time, it just wasn't given permission to be revealed, but it was always there. Varum, because because everything has its time to be revealed. Yeder Inyan, just like you can say why Moshiach didn't come back then. Everything has its time. Yeder Inyan, everything in the Torah has its time that it has to be revealed. This voice of Matan Torah. That's the whole idea, that it was a big voice and it never stopped, as we're going to talk about more, God willing, tomorrow, Friday. Okay, God willing, we'll finish this Sikha on Friday. I mean, even if we just, what we learned up to now is also earth shaking, but we can shake a little more. Let's go. Shake the earth. The world said, Keravelt Height, you have to turn over the world.